an officer presents each of the items. We then ask if there's points of clarification, and then if we've got speakers, which we have tonight, first of all there are councillors wishing to speak under Standing Order 44, and they can speak as long as they wish. Yes, I emphasise the wish bit. And then after that we can, and they will be asked if they have matters of clarification. After that we have an objector and a supporter of any application, and unfortunately as members of the public they only have 3 minutes to speak. So they, you really, if you are speaking to the public, you have to quite rapidly, and I hope the councillors will as well. We're not expecting any fire alarms to go off tonight. If they do, would you please make your way out through the door at the back, and your members come out through the door here. With that, I will start the agenda. Have we got any apologies, Howard?
Councillor Rachel second.
And Councillor Fole? Councillor Pearce not here either, is she?
No, she's not.
Right,
She sometimes doesn't.
Right, thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting, are you happy that I sign them with one slight amendment and the typo error? If you go to the minutes on page... mine's 9. Page 9, thank you, my copy's not... At the top of the page, it says Objective 9. Oh, hang on, no, it's not the right bit. I've gone to the wrong one, sorry. Yeah. If you look on the top bit where it says National Planning Policy Framework, Objective 9, Policy 4P and that bit, the next bit, it should say H5A and B. And on the next line, it says DG1B. And then it says 9C. The 9 is a typo, that should have been a bracket. So if members are happy with those slight alterations, are you happy that I sign the minutes? Will you please show? Thank you. Can I remind members of that declaration of interest? And we have, on item 4, we have no items that are the public have to be asked to leave from. So we will go straight on to item 5, which is the planning application for Home Farm Phase 2. And can I remind members, this is the reserved matters, the outline application with the roads and everything has already been agreed. So this is just the sort of the detail of this application. Thank you.
This application is for approval of the reserved matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping for 90 dwellings in the land to the southwest and northwest of Churchill Kin Road. It is the second phase of residential development that was approved in 2017. The first phase is already under construction. This is an image of the aerial of the site showing the application site is at the moment mainly agricultural land surrounding a farm complex. These slides show some photos of the site as of earlier this year. The slide shows a close-up of the farm complex, one building of which is listed.
Madam Chairman, could I just interrupt there? For the sake of us and for the sake of the public in the background, have you got your little light that you could help? That would, Matthew, that would be a little helpful for us all.
I'm afraid I don't have it, but I will just stand up and I will point at things
If you require.
If you take your microphone with you, it might be easier, Matt.
Okay. This slide is showing the layout of the application. So access has already been consented through the outline consent off Churchill to the southwest. The main access road rises into the site, and then there are cul-de-sacs off of that. I believe this slide is indicating the layout of the dwellings. The red ones are indicating the materials, and the blue ones a different type of material. The section 106 of the outline consent required a play area, so that is in the northwest of the site in this area with access from that direction. We have other areas of green space right down at the bottom end of the site and over here, which include the natural drainage basins. This slide is just indicating the detailed layout and showing the different boundary treatments. The site does undulate north, south and east to west, so we have asked for a number of sections for the site to show the relationship between the proposed dwellings and the proposed dwellings with existing dwellings around it. This slide shows the relationship with the proposed dwellings and the farm complex. So this section is drawn north to south. And this slide shows the relationship between the dwellings and the farm complex east to west. There were some later objections concerned with the impact of the proposed dwellings on the amenity of home farm, as has been reported in the additional information sheet. Now, the officers had already agreed that the relationship in terms of the impact on the amenity of home farm was acceptable, but as a result of the objections, the developer has amended the levels on the site so that the house nearest to home farm has dropped by 850 millimetres. As described on the additional information sheet, and this slide shows the revised relationship. It's also worth pointing out that the developer had already amended the dwelling here so that at the first floor level there wouldn't be a window on the rear elevation, there would be a roof light, meaning that it would be more difficult for people to overlook the occupiers of home farm. This slide just gives an impression of the appearance and character of the development. So we have a mix of render properties and brick properties. They are mainly two-storey, although there are a few three-storey dwellings and I believe 2 bungalows. This slide isn't the best slide showing the leap, but it is. That's what that is showing. And that's slightly blown up. So there were a number of objections, but officers consider that the application is acceptable, so approval is recommended with the conditions as per the officer's report. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey, do you have a question of clarification?
Thank you, Chair. If you look at clause 5, notwithstanding the details shown on drawing number ML01 revision D, all the existing hedgerows on site shall be maintained and managed in accordance with details that shall previously have been submitted to and approved in planning by the local planning authority. Both members and officers will recall that when the outline permission was granted, there was some considerable disquiet and concern with regard to biodiversity issues. I'd like you to explain to me exactly how those details that have been submitted to and approved by the local planning authority will be enforced, will be monitored and enforced, please. Thank you, Chair. I mean, the first thing to remind members of is it's the developer's obligation to comply with planning conditions, and we do not routinely enforce conditions on an ongoing basis. We react to local concerns where we believe there's been a breach of planning control. So I'm just reading the specifics of the condition. Again, sorry, just checking whether there's anything that further that needs to be submitted up front. I mean, clearly we would discharge the details which are submitted. We need to agree with those, but we would not undertake any regular monitoring to ensure compliance unless alerted to non-compliance by the public or a ward member, for example.
Another question, Councillor Harvey?
Yeah. Right, so I understand that. So you're saying you're not going to monitor it, and that's your standard procedure, and okay. Right, so if we monitor it, local people monitor it, and then come back to this authority with a view that poor behaviour has been expressed. The difficulty is as I found out to my cost on a previous development, not very far from here, when I reported this to the police under the Countryside and Planning Act 1991, I reported the fact to the police that the hedge had been taken away without permission. Yeah? When the police got there, they told me that there was no evidence left. Well, that's no surprise, is it? Because that's what I was complaining about, the fact that the hedge had been taken away. So I'm quite aware that local residents will keep us up to scratch in terms of whether or not this condition is met with. But the difficulty is enforcing it. So please can you tell me what your view will be on enforcing, please, Andy? I'm struggling to add to my previous answer, if I'm honest, Chair. We don't have any monitoring resources to go out and check on compliance with conditions. This is just by way of example, this particular reserve matters consent has 8 conditions on. I suspect there's probably 20 or 30 on the initial outline. So we do not routinely enforce compliance with these conditions which require ongoing maintenance of infrastructure, whether that's green infrastructure or kind of built infrastructure. We will react if it's brought to our attention that there's a particular concern.
Councillor Williams.
So, sorry, just to expand on that, I do know the case that you're referring to. That was a case where the hedgerow was planned to be removed. It's just it was removed before the developers had gone through the correct procedures of informing the council. And we took the decision that it wouldn't be expedient to take enforcement action.
Shame on you for that.
In this case, there is a condition on the outline consent requiring the erection of tree and hedgerow protection fencing. So that should set a clearer line to the developer to ensure they do not go beyond those fences and remove hedges when they shouldn't be. As I understand it, there is no long-term plan to remove the hedgerows in this case, as there was on the other case you were referring to.
Councillor Williams.
Given that in the case cited by Councillor Harvey, there was no evidence for the police, I wonder whether it might be feasible to ask the developers in this instance to take photographic evidence of the current hedgerows, so it's there on record. So should they contravene the agreement, then we have the evidence on file for the police to look at.
We can certainly add an informative in that regard to the consent if members approve the application this evening.
Thank you. If there are no other questions or clarifications, we have 2 councillors speaking under Standing Order 44. Councillors Oliver and Wood, which of you is going first? You're each pointing at each other. One of you make up your mind and come and speak, please.
I thought the Member of Public went first.
No, you come first.
Oh, okay. I'll go first.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Bearing in
Thank
mind
you,
this
Chair.
is a reserved matters application that
Oh, yes.
the outline has already been agreed.
We all understand that we're looking at reserved matters on outline planning permission granted at appeal quite some time ago. So you'll be pleased to know that as traffic impact is not part of the reserved matters, I won't be mentioning the Pinho gridlock tonight. Although, of course, some of the assumptions and some of the actions that were involved in that decision have not come to pass. So we are actually going to suffer quite badly in traffic from this, but it's not under these matters. The scheme layout here feels a bit like a quart in a pint pot. It doesn't look like it on that diagram, but actually, given the topography of the site, getting that layout in there has taken a lot of earth movement and a lot of change of the nature and the feel of that site. And that's something worth noting when we start to think about the listed buildings that we have there and how they will be affected. There's been a lot of flexible language used in the report that I've read. This is often the case, but it feels more extreme in this particular case. It's clear that our officers have worked hard with the developer to make the scheme the best it can be, given the land we're working with, or they're working with. As we've heard, there's a lot of references to sloping levels and difficult topography, both within the report itself and actually mentioned in the introduction to this piece. So I've also read in the term broadly meets quite a lot, such as broadly meets is broadly in accordance with national standards, broadly in line with this, broadly in line with that. That does really feel to me like the line has been pushed and a lot of flexibility has been brought into play. A lot of give and certainly a lot of take. There was an observation, one of the things that was broadly, was that outline permission, as was granted at appeal after this council and the local community rejected the scheme, approved at appeal for 120 units. So the comment was made, as 30 was put on phase 1, fitting 90 onto this difficult site is broadly in line with that approval. Now, I broadly agree with that logic, apart from, if they decided to only put 10 on phase 1, does that mean they're allowed to put 110 in here? 120 in the total, fine. The topography makes it very, very difficult to get the number of houses on there they want to get without dramatically changing the shape of this land and the feel of this land and the way water works on this land. So flooding is a real concern to me from someone that's had to wade through the water that flows down Church Hill currently. That's without building out and changing the topography, and not in a way which will reduce flooding. There are flooding measures put into the design, which I'll come back to in just a moment. But I think particularly one of the conditions listed or suggested within the report is that the solution of meeting the requirements for flooding prevention is a condition. I would say that there has been significant flooding in this area anyway, and it's not into the realms of, it just doesn't feel right that it's an afterthought. Flooding results from development quite often as a byproduct. We should realise this does flood. It floods badly, and yet the measures still to be agreed on to prevent this increasing the level of flooding that goes down the hill. And it goes down the hill straight into the centre of the village. We're not talking about flooding a road in the middle of nowhere. It goes straight into the middle of Pinho. It takes a sharp right-hand turn and floods bits of Harrington Lane. It's not very pleasant. It's not very user-friendly. Pinho goes downhill from here, and so does the water. So making flood management a condition that we'll sort out later really feels quite out of proportion to the impact that will happen. If, for whatever reason, the flooding consideration can't be agreed, but hey, we've got the planning permission, we're near enough there, let's just go ahead with it. So I'm very unhappy with that. I've got lots of issues with this site, but I'm not going to bore you with it for too long because I don't want to outlast my welcome. But the topography is the real challenge, and I think that has been. It almost feels like our guys, our officers, have had to make all sorts of gives to try and make this site work for the developer. Well, hey, this topography has been in existence for a very long time. In fact, 400 years ago, when they built what is now a listed building there, that topography was there then. But now, because there's some unwritten rule that you've got to fit 90 houses on here, suddenly you have to kind of bend and almost and broadly meets this or broadly meets that, just so that we can get 90 houses on there at some very crazy angles. So I'm not sure that quite feels right to me. And my last point, coming back to water again, is that open space. The report says there's 3 areas of open space, and as you can see from the diagram, largest one up the top there actually has water management scheme in it, a SUD, and also on the right hand side halfway down. Now, my understanding of open space is that it's for various forms of recreation. And I think Rec 5 or something is water recreation. Doesn't look quite big enough for water recreation, does look quite big enough for children to potentially drown in. Now that's a real concern. If we've got to fence it off because it's being used as a very much needed water retention scheme to reduce flooding, if it works, if we've got to fence it off, that's not open space anymore. That's a flood management scheme. How can you call that open space with a flood management scheme in it? It's either open space or it isn't. And if it isn't, then there isn't much open space in this property that's being in this development as it's being presented. So in summary, my concerns are that we've been pushed to the line trying to make a site which wasn't appropriate for this development. We knew it wasn't, we refused it. We were overruled at appeal. Fine, can't undo that. Doesn't alter the fact that the site isn't appropriate for this development, and we are being forced to look at a scheme of work which radically changes the terrain, impacts on the feel of the setting, and I don't think that that's right. It should be a scheme which is appropriate to the listed buildings present and appropriate to the setting. And the levels that they are being changed here is a concern. That and the flooding which already occurs could easily be exacerbated by these multiple layers, and we won't know whether or not it will until after the appeals conditions have been met. Well, by then you guys have passed it. It's approved, and we all know how hard it is to undo approval once it's given. It doesn't happen. So if you give approval based on we'll sort the flooding out later, then, well, Pinot gets flooded, I guess, again. So those are my concerns. That and where is the open space? I don't see the open space that's meant to be there. What I see is flood management schemes. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Does anybody have any questions to Councillor Wood before I ask Andy to comment on some things that Councillor has said? No questions. Andy, would you like to comment on the flood management and the open space being part of the flood defences?
Thank you, Chair. The condition Councillor refers to is a condition on the outline consent that is still required to be complied with. And the reason it's a condition on the outline consent is that flooding is a matter which is dealt with at the outline stage of the application. So again, it's not one for you this evening. The second matter about the public open space being the dual use for flood attenuation, that's something this committee has approved on several occasions previously. The county as lead flood authority subscribed to the joint dual use of public open space and flood attenuation. Obviously you can't use public open space where the flood attenuation will be so deep that it's unusable, but in this case it's seasonal, and that is an accepted best practice design element.
Thank you, Andy. You have a question, Councillor Morris? Well, no, wait.
Based on what you just said.
Okay.
Just for clarification, what can we consider for this application? Because I feel like there's going to be a lot going on.
Yeah.
So what can we consider that wasn't considered at outline, so that we're not all getting muddled?
Correct.
For the sake of everyone who's here, but also for me, because I don't think I understand.
Good point.
Yeah, so it's layout, scale, appearance, and landscaping. So it's effectively the relationship of the houses to each other and to the surrounds, what the dwellings look like, and the detailed landscaping elements.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Oliver, would you like to come to the table, please?
I'm not against development per se. I was elected on a manifesto which included measures to address the housing crisis, and local people accept that this development is happening. The scale and impact of development in Pinhoe is unprecedented though. What does concern me is the safety of highways for those who walk, cycle, drive and use buses. The Village Green campaign prevented the road being built through Eastern Fields. This was the main mitigating measure to reduce traffic congestion. And highways officers are left with difficult and complex decisions. Many residents have raised significant safety concerns. The cumulative impact of development in Pinhoe is not what we are here to look at tonight. It is, though, a wider context in which we need to consider the impact of the home farm development on Exeter residents. I was inundated with emails this weekend all about the reserved matters we are here to decide tonight. I will limit myself to 3: the play park, Pinhoe Heritage and groundwater. Mindful that I sometimes ramble on, I will read my contribution to limit myself to 3 minutes. The play park. The location of the play park has been changed. I understand it is now to be built in a more remote area of the site, as you'll see there, and it will not be safely accessible for neighbouring children from different developments, as was originally planned. Pinhoe Heritage. Initial publicity around these proposals said that the setting of Home Farm itself, a listed building, would be carefully considered. This historical house is a valued part of Pinhoe's heritage. I gather that the revised proposals impact badly on the setting and also change the contours of the hill. Home Farm and Church Hill have stood unchanged for 400 years. So, I ask that agreement of reserved matters be deferred to allow time for the developer to talk more to residents and come up with adjustments to ameliorate the negative impact on this heritage asset before it is too late. Groundwater. Many residents are worried about the flood risk for Church Hill and Pinhoe. I gather that the drainage gullies on Church Hill are worn out and need replacing. Could a site visit be arranged to look at this? And could a condition be imposed that insists gullies of a robust standard are in situ before development continues? Alterations made to the original plans mean that the linear park and landscape, i.e. some green space going across the whole lot, have been lost. Those plans for the one linear part of the play park and the landscape being green have been lost. Given that the original appeal was granted on the grounds of this happening, I am asking members and officers to review these changes and judge whether they are acceptable. Given that so much rain is held safely in trees, bushes and other natural ground cover, agreed wildlife habitat mitigation measures cannot be underestimated in their importance. Given the wider context of apparent non-compliance from other developers, notably the removal of a hedgerow in bird breeding season at Sandrock and lack of provision for birds and bats at Hillbarton, I ask members to consider carefully how any necessary enforcement will happen. It did sound earlier like it wouldn't, which concerns me. I think we need to resolve that issue before reserved matters are approved. I feel that the frustrations of any delay are outweighed by the need to provide a safe environment for incoming and local residents and to protect this heritage site.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Are you happy to take any questions? Has anybody got any questions for Councillor Oliver? No. Andy, would you like to respond to those comments, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think 2 points to make in this instance. First of all, the Councillor Oliver talked about the area of play space being changed from the outline. One must remember that at the outline stage, although there was a layout submitted, that was an illustrative layout, so it's not something that we approved at the time, so it's not changed. This is the first time you've had the opportunity to look at the location of the public open space. With regard to the suggestion of a deferral, I think specifically to amend the scheme in relationship to the listed buildings, I would consider that the setting of the listed buildings is covered in some detail in the report on pages 29 and 30, and as officers we've concluded that the impact is acceptable, and indeed following the late representation we've spoken again to the heritage officer, and he has confirmed that he has no objections to the scheme in respect of the setting of the listed buildings. Of course, members may take a different view on that particular issue this evening.
Thank you, Andy. We now have an objector, Mr. Anthony Farnsworth. If you'd like to come to the table, please, Mr. Farnsworth. And unfortunately, unlike your councillors from Pinho, you only have the 3 minutes when you're comfortable, and you will be timed.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Anthony Farnsworth, and I've lived at Home Farm, which is a Grade 2 listed building, since 1996. I accept that the principle of development on this site has been settled. Over the course of recent months, we've engaged with the developer over questions of site layout, levels, and treatment of boundaries as they impact upon Home Farm. Adjustments by Burrington, including a final set of changes sent on the 25th of September, offer further welcome mitigation on overlooking, which has been a concern up until now. The concern now is one of the setting of the listed building. The planning inspector's assurances on the impact of the development on the setting of the listed building were given before the detail of the actual layout and levels were known. The report before you today simply takes the inspector's findings and opinions, which incidentally refer to a different and more sympathetic layout, but as your officers just advised you, that was an outline and so doesn't count as a submission, but makes no attempt to assess the impact upon the listed building and its setting with what is now proposed. In view of the scale, prominence, proximity, and the loss of visual permeability caused by aspects of the proposed development, it's apparent that a significant detriment to the setting of the heritage asset will occur. In particular, the proximity and height of the proposed new buildings along the northern and eastern boundaries will overwhelm the architectural context of Home Farm. The officer's opinion regarding the acceptability of proposals from a residential amenity perspective is given, but the requirement to assess the impact upon the setting of a heritage asset has not been covered with respect to the present proposals. The proposals comprehensively sever the link between the asset and its setting, which, as Heritage England would tell you, is one of the relevant considerations. They also change the character of the setting. The proposals are indeed driven by the topography of the site, but this fails to be balanced with adequate consideration of setting. The upshot of the developer's attempt to achieve compliance with highways requirements is at the expense of the setting of the heritage asset. My request is that the application be deferred to allow the development of a more sensitive proposal. The listed building has been there for 400 years and the hill hasn't changed its shape. Adjustments to the developer's proposals could achieve a more sensitive treatment of the setting of a heritage asset, and I hope that that is how you decide today. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Farnsworth. You were just 3 minutes. Are you prepared to take questions?
If I can helpfully answer.
anybody want to ask any questions apart from Councillor Harvey, who I can see waving his arm? No, right, Councillor Harvey, it's up to you.
Thank you, Chair. Anthony, can you just confirm that my understanding is that Heritage England have not approved this current layout? Is that correct?
I don't think they've been asked. I'm not sure if they have a locus. The officers would tell you whether they actually have a role in approval. I just refer to Heritage England because I've drawn from their planning guidance in making some of my points.
If there isn't any other questions, Andy, would you like to respond, please?
So it's Historic England. They would not be a consultee on this type of application. It's down to the planning authority to assess the impact on the setting.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Farnsworth. We now have a Mr. Seaton who is in support of the application. Mr. Seaton, you likewise have 3 minutes when you're comfortable. If you just press the...
Thank you. Planning permission for this development was granted on appeal, and that appeal approved and therefore fixed the means of access to the site. My clients, Barrington Estates, purchased the site after that appeal decision was issued. They're a regional house builder, not a PLC, and they've gained a reputation for delivering high quality development with a product of higher quality than is normally delivered by PLC house builders. The site lies in 2 parts. The first part, the southwest parcel, has already been consented in detail and is in the process of being built out at the moment. In order to ensure that disruption to the community is kept to a minimum, my clients wish to continue that development programme. This reserve matters submission was made on the 19th of February, some 7 months ago. Since then, my clients have worked with your officers to ensure that a suitable scheme comes before this committee. It's important to recognise, as your officers point out to you, that the matter of impact upon listed building was considered by the Inspector of the Appeal, and that decision must be respected. And your officers have already drawn your attention to your heritage officers' comments in the updating. The proposals that are now before you have been revised to consider matters raised by those who commented on the application. Those changes have, in the opinion of ourselves and of your officers, had the effect of making the proposals that are before you for determination satisfactory. In particular, they have amended the house types and ground levels to minimise unneighbourly impacts. It's unfortunate that those amendments aren't considered to go far enough by some objectors. But those objectors are seeking, to a great extent, to rerun matters that were resolved by the former appeal decision, and they shouldn't be revisited. Where matters that relate to the design of the matters that are before this committee for determination, I can assure members that every reasonable step has been taken by my clients to respond positively to those concerns, and I can commend the scheme before to you as acceptable, as your officers do. The surface water details have been raised. This scheme will deliver a betterment over and above the existing situation. That was a key factor in allowing the appeal. The open space does exceed standards net of the SUDS provision, and it is simply wrong to suggest that on heritage grounds this matter should be revisited. The point of access is fixed. The outline consent accepted the principle of residential development wrapping around home farm. Please do understand, therefore, that all reasonable changes that can be made to this application have already been made. And in order to minimise disruption to the local community, please don't stop this development in its tracks. Instead, please accept the advice of your officers and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seaton. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Gazane. Sorry, my brain suddenly went, I couldn't think.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My concern here is the outside space and the health and, I mean, you said you have this playing area over there. It's right on the outside of the estate or the housing. I would consider this is an unsafe area for children to play in because it's completely not overseen. and also you've got the water issue there at some times of the year. How you are going to address that?
The area that is indicated for open space, it is the same area that was indicated for open space with the illustrative layout that was provided for the appeal. So there's no change there in those issues. The reason it's provided up there is because that is the one area of the site where, if you like, a larger, flatter, more playable area can be provided. Other than that, the site is rectangular in shape, and the topography makes it very difficult. There is a linear space that runs down through the site. You can see it running basically part way through where the hedgerow is maintained. But because of the way that the levels work, those areas aren't inherently suitable for really kids to run around and play. In terms of overlooking, there are properties that will overlook that. It is really from first floor, not from ground floor levels. But it is the best that I think can be achieved in this particular location.
Councillor Harvey.
David, thank you very much for what you said, and I very much welcome the concept that talks about minimising disruption to local people. Can you confirm or deny that the site, which is already in the process of being built out, construction started before a construction methodology statement was received and approved by this authority?
I'm afraid I can't. We weren't actually instructed by Burrington Estates at that time. We've only been involved in this second part of this site for Burrington's.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any comment from you, Andy? Oh, sorry, I didn't see Councillor Mitchell, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just some clarification, if you could. In your opening statement, you referred to the two sites, and one of which is proceeding, and this one being the balance. And in our paperwork, it's quite clear that the outline proposals were for 120 across both sites. Could you indicate to me whether the 30 dwellings on site number 1 are similar, both in size, nature of space, and cost, as distinct to the 90 you're placing on here? Because one of the issues raised by Councillor Harvey earlier was the problem of density. And I'm just wondering, have you equated both sites so they're both getting similar treatment?
I'll probably be criticised for using the word broadly, but I'm afraid I'm going to. But yes, broadly they are a similar mix, similar basic, similar house types that have been used on both elements of the overall site.
The density is the same.
Similar.
Yeah, it's not.
It's
not.
No, it isn't. There's 50 4- and 5-bedroom houses on this site.
I'm sorry, members of the public, you're not allowed to speak.
So are the nature of the dwellings on both sites the same? Or are the points we're hearing in the background of one is 4 to 5 bedroom, which obviously have a higher cost and higher value, as distinct from 90 of these, which might be of a smaller size?
In overall terms, the mixes and densities are similar.
So there is no way, in your professional opinion, you could have spread the load of the 120 differently across both sites?
No.
Councillor Henson, did you wish to speak?
No.
If there are no other questions, thank you very much, Mr. Seaton. We will now open the debate on this one. Who wants to start? Councillor Williams.
It's very difficult for those of us that are not that familiar with the site to understand the difficulties in terms of the listed building and how this development is going to affect that. And I just wondered, when we've had other developers sort of talk to us about the developments that they're proposing, we've actually had images showing what the views are like once this development had been put in place. So have we had anything like this, which shows what the effect of this development would have on the listed building, on the aspect of that?
We've had detailed section plans showing the relationship between the listed building and the proposed buildings in terms of the separation distance and the levels.
But not generated images. That it sort of looked, you know, this is what it looks like from this this part of the land, and this is what it looks like from a different geographical
No,
point.
we haven't received any photo montage images or any 3D perspective images, although in fairness to developers, we as officers haven't requested those images or those plans based on the evidence of the outline consent, the appeal decision, and obviously our own heritage officer has reviewed the plans and the file and has agreed that the impact on the setting of this building is acceptable.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Although there are many aspects of this development with which I'm unhappy, as those who were at the original planning permission inquiry will have noted, as many people are saying, that ship has sailed. It seems to me that the only issue about which is relevant this evening, which gives us some cause for thought, is the issue about the setting and relationship with the historic building. And my difficulty here is that I understand that Historic England are not a statutory consultee, but I would like them to have been consulted in this case. So I would like to propose that we defer this application for a view from Historic England, and simply that on that matter alone, even though I understand they are not a statutory consultee, given some of the information that we've been given tonight. I think that would be an appropriate thing to do.
Are you making that as a... Oh, you want to say something, Andy? Yeah.
A couple of points to you, Chair. Firstly, I suspect if we consult them, they won't respond. They'll say it's not their responsibility. It is the responsibility of the local authority. Clearly, we have a heritage officer who's very experienced, highly qualified. His view is that this application is not refusable on the grounds of the setting of the listed building. And I think more widely, if I may, Chair, I would ask members to consider if they have I'm trying to identify what the particular concern is with the impact on the setting. If I'm being absolutely honest with you, I think the minute that outline planning permission was granted for this site, the setting of the historic building is compromised. It's a farm. Farms are usually set within fields. The planning inspectorate approved a housing estate that sits around it, and we are making a decision within that framework. So I think if members are uncomfortable about the particular relationship with the setting, I just need to understand that in a little bit more detail if we decide to go back to the developer for some kind of amendment.
Councillor Mitchell.
I agree with Councillor Williams on this. The presentation we've had so far has not elucidated much information or clarity on the relationship of the development to the existing heritage site. And I think, as with Councillor Harvey, we need more detail on the relationship of this development to that historic building before we grant final permission, or else, again, the boat sailed and it's too late. I was concerned about the slide that was shown earlier up here, showing eye lines with the buildings at the site. That was the only perspective I had on the relationship of the buildings to the farm site. And even then I was somewhat concerned about the scale of the mound seemed to be about 9'4" in relation to the ceiling. We are not getting the detail here. Once this is done, it is done. And I think we need more detail, more independent detail on the relationship of the development to the heritage site.
Councillor Morse.
Before I begin, Home Farm is an open wound for this local authority, and every time we have to picket it, it upsets us. And there are very strong feelings about it. It's been previously mentioned, this planning committee, which predates quite a few people sitting on it, refused the application very strongly. It was refused and defended at appeal, and we failed, and then it was taken to the High Court in an attempt to overturn that decision. That's how strongly this local authority does not believe we should be at a reserved matter stage with this application. yet we have lost every battle we've fought on it. Now, that means that due to matters beyond our control, we are looking at an application that, to be brutally honest, is never going to satisfy any of us if we are thinking with our hearts and our beliefs on this one. I came to the original meeting on this, and Councillor MacDonald, who was the councillor for Pinnow at the time, spoke for 40 minutes essentially on the flooding issues, which we don't even get to consider this time, but which were dismissed pretty much by the planning inspectorate when it went to appeal. So it breaks my heart to have to sit here and vote in a way that I have not supported in the past. But I do feel, as much as there probably is an impact on that setting, I agree with the officers that we're probably looking for something that we hope will make a difference and means that we can refuse an application, and that in the future we're going to end up at an appeal where they're going to tell us it was perfectly reasonable because that decision's already been made, and we are going to end up paying quite strong costs for our unreasonable behaviour. I don't want to do this. I still believe it should be a beautiful green ridge line, but that decision was taken away from us, and we have to accept that we now have to give consent for something. I don't think the layout of this is bad. I don't think it's great by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think it's good enough to defend at appeal. And as a result, I don't think we should be deferring the application because we'll be seen to be unreasonable again. And I don't think we can refuse it. Now, other people may disagree with me, but I want to make it clear it's not a decision any of us are making happily. Someone else made this decision for us, and we now find ourselves here.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Before I go any farther, you proposed a deferral. Were you seconding that deferral, Councillor Mitchell?
Subject to the independent inquiry into the historic council.
I'm speaking against it.
Well, I think perhaps before we do anything else, we better go to the vote of deferring this item, because there's no point in debating it anymore.
Can we just clarify what the deferral was from? Not clear what an independent assessment is or how we would secure it.
Councillor Harvey, you were the person who suggested this, so give us the words.
Well, my wording was Historic England should be allowed to look at it. Andy seemed to think that Historic England wouldn't even reply. Yeah, my residents, as you've heard, are very upset. They believe that not enough work has been done, and there are other things that could be done. So possibly we could ask an independent heritage assessment person. Now there is somebody, and I can't remember his name, who did an independent assessment of my house. I live in a Grade 2 listed building, by the way, right? Who did an independent assessment of my house and produced a historic study. I can't remember his name. Can you remember?
David, Councillor Harvey, can you get to the point, please, of what your reason for deferral was?
My reason for deferral is I don't believe that this is an appropriate setting in terms of the historic building. I've listened to what Andy said about once you're in there, yeah, and it doesn't matter. I've listened to that. I would like a further independent assessment of the setting as it stands.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Mitchell, are you prepared to second that? Right. Before we go any further, can I have a vote on the motion of Councillor Harvey's? All those in favour, please show.
4 in favour.
Those against?
3, 4, 5 against.
Right, the motion is lost. We'll carry on debating this one. Councillor Bialik.
I've listened to it all, and I want to come in and support Councillor Morse here, who has stuck her head above the parapet, and I don't think it's fair that she should be left up there on the lawn. So I'm climbing up on the parapet with her to agree with her analysis of all of this. Isn't what we want to do. And even if we went to Historic England, and I know we've passed this point now, and even if they agreed, I'm not sure that would have any weight anywhere else, to be brutally honest. But I don't think it was going to help. I think, unfortunately, we're in a cleft stick here, and we have no option but to support, on this occasion, sadly, the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Bialik. Councillor Henson. Yes.
Madam Chairman, I would agree with the leader here. The fact is that we're caught over the coals. I've refused this site every time I've been here. when we asked to have it built. But we're asking this on matters which we're going to be caught over the coals for, and I would totally agree with the last speaker. If anybody stands up in this room, I've argued and argued and argued for what I believe in. The fact is that, we've got to hold our historic housing. But in this case, I think the builder and the officers have done as much as they got. All we're doing is delaying it, and at the cost of the council. We're paying at the end of the day. But I do feel, I don't want to support it, but I have to under the law that we have before us. And as for open space and play area, I think that's far more area than any other I've seen builder give to open space in the last 5 or 6 years. And as for the area for water at the end, and I do hear what the councillor to my right is saying about the safety, and that is a foremost must be, and I believe the builder himself is answered that question. But also in the quarry, the new building quarry off of Harrington Lane there was a water area there that we were very concerned of, and it was dealt with in the proper way when it was finished, or is being finished. And I think we've got to certainly watch this, but that's the biggest area I've seen for play area for many a site in this city, and God, I wish all the sites had that size. Anyway, I'm reluctantly going to support the officer's decision.
Councillor Hussain.
Just got some questions to Mr. Robbins, Officer Robbins. If we agreed this supposedly and it passes and then they build it and then there are floods, who will be responsible for the flooding in that area?
I'm not sure I can answer that question with any degree of confidence. I mean, it would depend on the nature of the flooding.
Can we put any sort of conditions that the developer will meet some of the issues of flooding if it happens in the future?
So the condition on the outline consent requires all the drainage details to be agreed with us, and we effectively use the county council as the lead flood authority, and we will only sign off that condition as and when those details are satisfactory. And I'm aware that there are still negotiations about the finer details of that design with the county council. And they've been ongoing for some time, so the guys over at county are looking at it very, very carefully.
Right. Thank you, Andy. Councillor Branston.
Thank you, Chair. I think, on balance, I think the comments made by Councillor Morse and Henson are compelling, and I'm going to support this application.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak on this item? Now, the application is down to approve. Andy, can we put something there about the photographic evidence of hedgerows as part of a condition or part of an informative?
While Andy's looking at that, can I just make a point in regards to what we were saying about some of the flooding issues, where Andy said there are still discussions going on. Of course, if this is to be passed, of course, those discussions will still go on and nothing will be agreed until satisfaction is reached and all that. We can assume that, can't we?
I'm sure we can.
Good.
Through you, Chair, what I would actually suggest, if you are minded to approve the scheme, if you allow us to slightly amend the wording of condition 5, which covers the hedgerow, which will require some kind of existing benchmarking exercise, so to speak, in terms of photographic evidence, and to ensure that the hedgerows themselves are protected during the construction process.
Many of them have gone already, though. Hedgerows.
Are members happy with that amendment to condition 5?
Yeah.
Right, we now have to go to the vote, and I need a mover and a seconder of this, so who will do that for me, please? Thank you, Councillor Morse. And Councillor Bialek is going to second it. Can I now ask all those in favour, please show.
5 in favour.
Those against?
Just 1.
Abstentions?
3.
That is approved. We'll now move to item 6, which is the land at Monmouth Street, Topsham. And can I welcome Keegan to his first planning committee. Don't be too hard on him, members.
Thank you, Chair. No pressure. The application is a proposal for the change of
Hold on
use.
just a moment, Keegan. There are members of the public leaving, so just wait till they've gone.
Are we ready to go? No, that's all right. Something I said. So yeah, the proposal is a change of use from agricultural land to the keeping of horses, which falls under the use class of sui generis, and it's the construction of 2 stables. Just for clarification, it is 1 stable block with 2 stables within it, just to clear that up. You can see the outline of the site here. It's comprised of 3 agricultural fields. It's Monmouth Street to the north and Bowling Green Road to the sort of north-east. It's going to utilise an existing access, which you can see on the junction to Bowling Green Road. That goes through the first field into furthest field from Monmouth Street, and the stable will be tucked up in the corner. Here is an aerial photo. You can see that the access that comes in at the top goes through a wooded area, and the 2 fields to the bottom are what are proposed for this horse grazing. The stable itself is approximately 30 square metres as a footprint, maximum height of 3 metres, and will be a timber construction with a felt pitched roof. We have received quite a number of objections for the application, largely down to the issue of potential future development on the site, but there was other issues to do with ecology and landscape. Officer recommendation is to approve the application. From a sort of strictly planning perspective, I don't think it's outside of any sort of policies we have, but I'll pass over to you guys for any questions.
Do any members have any questions before we go any further? Councillor Morse.
One of the arguments or objections is that if we were to give consent for this, it would be more likely that we would give consent for further development. I'm assuming a concern for housing or whatever. Can you explain how likely that would be, essentially? What process would you have to go through if you wanted a different application?
Yeah, any sort of other application would require a full other application. In itself, you know, it's got quite a lot of local designations on the site. So in terms of larger scale development, we'd have to look at that on its planning merits.
Councillor Sheldon.
Yeah, I'm going to tell I'm an expert in the area of agricultural planning regulation because it doesn't come up often in Exeter. But correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is agricultural building doesn't require planning permission, so if this was a pigsty, planning permission wouldn't be required, and you could have a field full of pigs with all the associated movements that would create without even applying for planning permission. Did if it was a cow shed and you put cows in the field rather than horses, we wouldn't even need planning permission. Have I got that right?
Yeah, so to a point, if it was agricultural land, there's a lot more permitted development rights. Now that it's being potentially changed to sui generis, there's a lot more control over what can be built under PD.
So just to come back, so if this goes ahead, they'll actually have greater control over what's built on this land in the future than we currently do.
Yeah, that's correct.
Councillor Hussain.
One of the objections was about the paths for the cyclists and pedestrians, and the horses might be used to block, or horse boxes might be a hindrance to an obstacle for cyclists and for pedestrians. Is that the case? What is going to be done about this?
So there is an existing access at the top, which is adequate size for a car or horse box. We consulted with Devon County Highways, who raised no concern and judged that the level of movement expected would be pretty low, and that there's been no major sort of accidents recorded at that junction. So I don't think there would be any other sort of action we would take from that point.
Councillor Bialik.
Just help me. There's no cycle path going through there. There's no road going through there. This is just the access. This is just the access for the people using the stable, isn't it? That's what it would be. So it's not like a public thoroughfare or anything else like that. Am I right? And the access is up the top there, up the top of where Altamara is. And Chair, I have to tell you, I used to live there, and I know the area very well. So I just want to understand that you're not putting a cycle path through any of that. The cycle path and the footpath and the roadway goes all the way around to the goat walk.
Yeah, they have been kept separate, and there's no, it doesn't cross over.
Just help me build a picture.
Thank you. We now have an objection to this. Miss Margaret Reid, if you'd like to come to the table, please. And like the previous speakers, you only have 3 minutes when you're comfortable. If you press the button on the right-hand side, it should come on in the front. That's the one. Press it.
3 minutes? Right. I'm speaking on behalf of the 55 also Topsham people who objected to the proposed development, as they are concerned that this is the first stage to housing that's happened with a recent boathouse to house development in Topsham. People also objected to it disturbing a wildlife haven, SSI. It would also destroy an undeveloped natural landscape. It could be seen from Higher Shapter Street, Monmouth Street, Altamira and Mount Howard Drive. It would lead to an increase in vermin, flies and smell in a location adjacent to housing. There would be traffic problems at a narrow, congested junction which has parking in the corner, frequent cyclists, motorists and pedestrians. The land was historically used as a market garden, never for livestock, to the best of my knowledge. The land contains a registered priority habitat, is within the Lapwing and Redshank consultation zones, and is located adjacent or in very close proximity to the ex-estuary Ramsar site of special scientific interest and special protection area. From the Exeter City Core Strategy, it is a wetland site of international importance. There is a risk that any stables erected are subsequently converted into dwelling houses via change of use or used to facilitate the grant of permission for dwelling houses in the future. There's also the question, not dealt with, of water and electricity supply for the horses. Details have not been given. There would be a number of overriding objections to the grant of planning permission for the construction of dwelling houses on the application site, following from the landscape setting policy and local plan for Exeter. I strongly maintain my objection to the application for permission to construct stables. If this application were to be granted, I request it's granted subject to the condition that the application site is not further developed into or used for the construction of dwelling houses.
Thank you very much, Ms Reid. Are you happy to take questions?
Yes.
Councillor Branston.
I'd just like to congratulate you on your speech. That you really put it over with passion.
Councillor Branston, can you speak to your microphone all the way from it?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to congratulate you on your passion and the issues that you've raised. The one thing that surprised me, though, is why, or I was surprised, that you had no support from your local city councillors to speak on your behalf. Is there a reason that you were not given that support? Did you not ask them, or?
Well, I think I did send an email about it, but
Right.
no.
Okay, thank you.
And I contacted David Burnley, our Topton Society officer. But thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Councillor Williams.
You mentioned that the area being used as a market garden.
Yes.
Did you? So
Many years ago.
So what I find slightly confusing is if it was used as a market garden, there would have been issues of movement of traffic then, but also it's the use of the land. So it seems, I just wondered if it was sort of slightly contradictory what you were saying, that it's a conservation area, but it hadn't been previously.
Yeah, I don't think well, you must know much more about the past history of it, the planning, than I do. But it was Maysfield a very long time ago, an agricultural market garden, and then it was just left, it was bought, I think, by some South African developers. It'd be interesting to know who actually owns the fields now, because they're acting through an agent.
Okay,
it's just been left wild. It's a wonderful wildlife haven. Slow worms,
okay,
bats,
thank you. Thank you.
dormice, all these protected species at risk.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Right. Before we go into the debate, I'd like, thank you very much. Could I
just say one more thing?
No, I'm sorry. 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 Can I ask one question, Keegan? What water supply is there on site for the horses?
So I've questioned the agent, and they said that they'll be bringing water and supply onto site rather than having something connected up. But again, we'd have to work out whether it would require consent if there was something like that in the future.
I mean, surely, unless they're going to be sort of, there needs to be water onto the site and nothing else, but I mean, horses do need to be able to drink. Right, can we go into the debate on this one, please? Who wants to go first? Councillor Bialik.
Yes, Chair. Thank you for that, and I totally understand what Margaret Reid had to say. As I said, I did live over the road in Altamara for many years, knew it well, knew it right back about 45 years ago, and I think there might have been some greenhouses there at one stage, but it wasn't even being used at that time. I still think there's a bit of a gate entrance up the top. Look, we know, we've heard from the officer in relation to that, an application, well, if you can never, it's not against the law to put an application in, okay? First of all, we cannot make it illegal. How dare you put an application in? We can't stop them. But if it helps assure the people, even though we know they would have to come through us again, so if it helps, then why don't we just put a condition in like that, if it helps. If it also helps, the reference to 2 horses, I'm not sure we can, but we ought to limit that, because, you know, if that helps, because what we're trying to say, we're looking at this at face value, and we accept it on face value. And what we're clearly hearing from residents of Topsham is that they understand that, but they are in fearful that this is the thin edge of the wedge, as it said in there. So why don't we just give them those assurances that they need, because it will go through and it's absolutely fine. Now, If the applicant don't like giving those assurances, then indeed there was something else going on maybe. So I don't think there would be a problem in doing that. So I would support it if we can just get it through in that way, to give some people some comfort at the very, very least. This is an area of outstanding beauty, round the bowling green, down the goat walk and everything else. For those of us who go around it quite regularly, walk round, cycle down, use the new cycleway and go round there. It's a lovely way with the birds and everything else. It is a beautiful part of town. Of course we don't want to spoil it. Of course we're not going to get rid of it. So let's just do what we can to assure the people, not just in Topsham but everywhere, that we are not megalomaniacs here. We are not doing bad things. We want to try to do things for the good of everybody.
Councillor Henson.
Madam Chairman, I think what we're trying not to discuss is new builds on this site, and the only thing we really can discuss is 2 stables, which is on the land here. Now, my days of riding, and still do ride, and dealing with horses, is that those fields could take another 2, and I would say that I don't think you can limit the horses. They could leave 2 outside, 2 inside, and as long as horses got shelter of whatever. But what I am concerned is that I would agree with Mrs. Reid that the fact is that this could be redeveloped, and that's what really this is all about. And to have 55 objections is quite a lot of objections. But are they objecting to the stables or the possibility to redevelop? And we're not here to discuss the redevelop. We're here for stables. And I think we're in no position to refuse 2 stables.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Morton and I carried out a site inspection with the planning officer on the site. My only concern in regard to the application is not the site of the stables, because they've chosen a corner plot within it, some mid-distance between of the site. My only concern is the one raised by one of the objections raised by the objector was in regard to the traffic issues. At the moment, there is a swing gate at the entrance to this site, to the woodland entrance to the site, which has to be opened for vehicles to make access. And I think if this is to go ahead, that entrance needs to be recessed sufficiently along the drive to allow a horse box and vehicle to enter the site and not block the public highway. At the moment, they would have to park adjacent to the gate, blocking the highway. They're both narrow on all 3 sides there, effectively on the triangle there. And I think if they had to recess the gate and put side panelling as well along there, and then could pull in their vehicle and horse box as required, that would ease the traffic flow situation, and also would temper as to whether they're serious about this being just for horse use only.
Keegan, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah. I mean, given the response we had from Devon County Council, I don't think it would be reasonable to request a new access or plans to change their access, which at the moment has been considered okay by the Highway Authority, particularly given that the level of traffic that will result from having potentially 2 or so horses on the site will be minimal. So I don't think we would be willing to do that.
Does anybody else wish to speak on this one? Is it sensible, and can I ask the officers, can we limit the number of horses on this site?
Do you want to go?
My advice to you on that, Chair, would be no. It's a substantial area of potential grazing land, which I know nothing about horses, but I'm pretty sure it could accommodate 4 horses. But ultimately, that's not an issue for us as a planning committee, unless you can identify any particular harm by there being 3 horses or 4 horses. I don't think it's one for us.
Hang on. we've limited the stables to not for two horses. Yes, yeah. Can I, Andy? Is it sensible to put a condition about provision of water on the site? Because that does concern me.
No, is the short answer again. I think one must recall that one must remember that the National Planning Policy Framework is very clear about when you should impose conditions, and to quote it here, planning conditions should be kept to a minimum and only imposed where they are necessary, relevant to planning and to the development to be permitted, enforceable, precise and reasonable in all other aspects. I don't think that the water supply for the horses is a relevant planning matter, and there are instances where stabling doesn't have its own water supply. It's brought on by tanks, etc. Again, I don't think it's one for us as a committee.
Thank you, Andy. Right.
I did ask those, and I totally accept what the officer's saying, and I trust that those people listening to us and the objector understands that there is no intention of myself or I think this committee to do anything else but to build a stable there for two horses, and anything else would come back to us and we wouldn't like it. I'd like to think that message got across, even though we can't do it within there.
And through you, Chair, if I may, I mean, just to reiterate the point for everybody's benefits, this application, should you approve it this evening, does in no way set a precedent for any other form of development on this land. I think, as has been pointed out, at the present time it would benefit from agricultural permitted development, which would allow some buildings to be erected without our control. This effectively gives us complete control over its future. It's not, in my mind, an appropriate site for housing. There would be many very good planning reasons why you would resist housing development on this site. So I don't think either yourselves as members or members of the public should be concerned in any way about setting a precedent here.
Thank you, Andy. And I hope members of the public are reassured that we are looking at horses and one stable for two horses on this site and nothing else. And that we actually have more control now than we had before. Right, I need to go to the recommendation is to approve this. I need a proposer and a seconder for this one. Councillor Shelton, Councillor Bialik again. All those in favour, please show. Thank you, members. That one is passed. We now go to item number 7, list of decisions made and withdrawn applications. Andy?
No questions notified, Chair.
Appeals report.
3 appeal decisions here, all on the same site, all relating to the installation of roof lights in effectively roof accommodation, attic accommodation. Each of the appeals was dismissed, the inspector agreeing with ourselves as planning authority that the outlook of the occupants of any of these rooms would be unacceptable and result in a, quote, oppressive and unwelcoming space.
Councillor Harvey's waving his hand.
I am indeed. I believe, if I've got this correct, that these are in my ward, right? And I believe that they have actually been built. So are we going to do anything about the fact that the planning permission, there is no planning permission for them? What are we going to do?
So my understanding is that these applications are part retrospective, so some of the works have been undertaken, and yes, we will be taking enforcement action to reverse the works, remove the unauthorised development.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Harvey?
I'm extraordinarily happy. I'll be around at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to have a complaint.
Right, item number 9, site inspection party on 15th of October. Councillors Harvey, Henson and Guzane. Have I said your name right? Thank you. I always worry. 15th of October, that's what it says on my sheet of paper. Yes, it is the 15th. Yes, it is the 15th of October. It's full council, yeah. I hope those 3 members can manage that date. If not, can you find somebody else to, if there are any inspections?
Yeah.
Yes. And the date of the next planning committee is Monday the 28th of October. Thank you all for coming. The meeting is closed.